Thought I would take some time today to talk a little bit about inflation. What is inflation? How does it affect you personally, and what, if anything, can you do about it? It's really good question to be asking. So first of all, as far as what inflation is, inflation reflects, it's a gauge of the rising costs of goods and services. Okay, and specifically, the index for inflation excludes the cost of two things: gas and food. Which is interesting because rising costs in gas and food are reflected, throughout other things. But because of the volatility of gas prices, it's excluded, and because food can be impacted by things like drought and weather and stuff, it's excluded. Anyway, as far as what it means specifically, if you were planning to spend $1 on something, when inflation goes up by 2%, then you will have to spend $1.02 more. I'm sorry, that was unclear. You will have to spend $1 plus 2 cents to get the same goods. A better example is, say we were going to buy a game plus a season pass, and together those two things cost $100. Okay? Well, if inflation is 2%, then in theory, next year, if you're going to buy the same game at the same price, you would have to pay $102 for it. Now, typically, the federal government tries to keep the inflation rate around 2%. If it rises above that, they take action. If it goes below that, they have plans to do something for that as well. Now, what's been going on is apparently there's been a 5% increase in inflation here in 2021. We're up. Inflation is now around 2.5%, where it was around, 2.25%, where it was around 1.24% this same time last year. If I've got all my facts straight and my sources accurate. And so that means that essentially it costs more to buy something this year than it did last. Now, what impact does that have on you as the individual? The truth is, not a lot. Not a lot if you're just starting out. Not a lot if you're living within your means. Not a lot if you're working on under a budget and you have an emergency fund and things of that nature. It does, however, mean quite a bit if you're on a fixed income. It means quite a bit if you are a person that is living check to check and has no emergency fund, nothing to fall back on, no kind of safety net. So if you're young, which most of the people that I'm trying to reach are in like the 14 to 25 age range, then it's inflation is not going to mean a lot to you right now. It's not going to affect you a lot in your personal life. The only thing you're going to notice is that, hey, when you go out to eat, stuff's going to cost a little more. When you go shopping, things are going to cost a little more. But typically, it's not going to hurt you dramatically. The people that it is going to hurt is the people that we're about to retire. The people who, as I mentioned before, are already stretched to the gills. One more thing is really going to hurt them. And so as far as what can you do about inflation, that's a better question. What you can do is you can look for ways to either increase your income or reduce your expenses. And you have to adjust your budget accordingly for any of those big purchases that you might have been planning to make. Odds are, whatever price you thought they were going to cost, it's going to cost more than that when you're actually ready to do it. So for instance, if you were planning to buy a house, and you had budgeted to buy a house this year, and you were saving, and let's say you were planning to pay cash for the house. I know it seems a little unrealistic, but if you had $100,000 saved up, that same house, it's going to cost more than that now. Now, there were clues that that was going to be the case. For instance, rising lumber costs. That affects the housing market. So it's not something that tends to catch people completely by surprise. But it can really hurt. If you were planning to retire this year, well, rising inflation means that you might have to work an additional year so that you can make sure that your money that you set aside to retire on is going to last long enough. Because it's not going to buy as much as it would have, and there's nothing saying that prices are going to immediately go back down. Now, a lot of people, when talk of inflation heats up, are worried about their investments, and that's why. Something that you need to be aware of, as far as that is concerned, is, as mentioned earlier, you need to be in a position where you're constantly increasing your income by anywhere from 2 to 5% each year. So if you're in a job where you get little to no raise, well, then that means that your income is not keeping up with the cost of living, and that really hurts you. And as far as that goes, your options are, you could take on a second job, you can look for a different job, or you can cut back on your budget. And the sad reality is that most people, their budget is already cut back as far as it can be. In general, people don't tend to take a lot of vacations. They don't tend to have a lot of what they call discretionary funds into their budget. And so their only option in times of inflation is to start to rely on credit. And sadly, during times of inflation, creditors tend to cut back on how much credit they're willing to extend to people. So it can really be, a domino effect, and really impact a lot of aspects of your life. That's why I encourage people, A, to set up a budget, B, to make sure that you've got an emergency fund and things like that. Typically, rounds of inflation don't tend to... The cost of goods doesn't tend to stay up for ever. For instance, lumber prices. They were sky high, but now they're coming down. That's what I'm talking about when I say that the cost of goods don't tend to stay up forever. Now, the cost of things do tend to increase year over year. That's why for your parents and grandparents, when they were a kid, gas costs a nickel per gallon, and now it costs $3 per gallon. That plus several other factors. So when you're laying out your financial plan, you have to allow for things like this. And you don't want to be living check to check. And you want to be able to adjust accordingly whenever a challenge arises.